Tonight, tense moments in the nation's capital. Parliament Hill locked down for hours and people told to shelter in place as police investigate what sparked the nerve-wracking situation. United in defiance of Donald Trump and his tariffs.
If we work together, we're going to have a better bargaining chip against the Americans, if you want to put it that way.
What Canadians and Mexicans are both saying about the economic attacks by their shared neighbor.
Saying that the U.S. is an enemy, it's a bad feeling.
As oil slumps below Alberta's budgeted barrel price, what will it mean for industry crews and consumers?
We'll end up having some rig workers that are without jobs for a few weeks or a few months.
And separated by the sea, a love story lives on.
Looking at him and it just like hitting me in the gut, like, oh my God, I love this man.
How a naval mission ended in a commitment to true love.
CTV National News with Heather Butts.
Good evening. We begin with a developing story out of Ottawa, where late tonight, police say an hours-long lockdown on Parliament Hill is now over. Police say a man gained unauthorized access to the East Block Saturday afternoon and barricaded himself inside. Officers set up an extensive perimeter and brought in a robot to help deal with the tense situation as the building was evacuated. Roughly 8 hours later, police confirming it ended without incident. One man is in custody. The criminal investigation is ongoing. Turning to the campaign trail now, where leaders are focused on growth, both for the economy and infrastructure. Each party today pitching a vision of what Canada can do to help build itself up. CTV's Colton Prale on what parties are promising on day 14 of this federal election campaign.
There are some tough days ahead. I'm not going to sugarcoat it.
As the country braces for the impact of Trump's tariffs, Mark Carney is promising Canada can build its way out of trouble.
We cannot control President Trump. Ultimately, he will be influenced by what he is doing to his economy, without question. But what we can control is how we build.
The Liberal leader announcing plans to cover $8,000 worth of apprenticeship training for skilled workers and spend roughly $45 million to increase training opportunities. Key components for his plan to grow industry and speed up home building to respond to international pressure on the Canadian economy.
Bureaucracy and red tape has grown on our...
Pierre Poilievre also focused on building, specifically the regulations around it.
A Conservative government will cut red tape by 25% over the next 2 years.
Poilievre promising to remove red tape by cutting 2 regulations for every new one added and apply the same principle to new administrative costs on businesses. Meanwhile, the NDP says a defense against Trump needs to focus on Canadian values.
The thing that Canadians are most proud of when they talk about how we take care of each other is healthcare.
Singh promising a family doctor for every Canadian by 2030, something he says can be done by increasing health transfers, the number of residencies, and creating new national licensing. And in Quebec, the Bloc taking aim not only at Trump, but at Ontario.
Canada is centralizing its politic authority in Ottawa and centralizing its economic authority in Toronto.
The Bloc criticizing the centralization of Canada's financial markets in Toronto, while pushing for more regulation to limit foreign takeovers of Canadian companies.
But even as leaders pitch their plans to help Canadians weather the economic storm, there was a reminder that we're already dealing with a deluge. In March, the country saw its largest monthly job loss since 2022, and the tariff impacts are only just beginning to be felt. Heather.
Colton Prale in Ottawa. There are growing calls tonight for the Conservative Party to distance itself from yet another candidate. Aaron Gunn, running in the BC riding of North Island Powell River, is coming under fire for social media comments about residential schools and Canada's treatment of Indigenous people. First Nations leaders, along with municipal leaders, are calling for him to be removed. The Conservative leader is standing by his candidate.
Do you still stand by Aaron Gunn as your candidate on the North Island?
Yes, I do, and the letter is false. He has not denied the impact of residential schools. That's just misinformation.
Gunn has released a statement on X that reads, in part, "I have always been firm in recognizing the truly horrific events that transpired in residential schools, and any attempt to suggest otherwise is simply false." Parties are looking to pick up more union endorsements before Election Day, securing the votes of trades workers. Trump's tariffs are expected to have a huge impact on that group, some in the auto sector already facing temporary layoffs. CTV's Judy Trin explains.
This General Motors plant in Oshawa only makes Silverado trucks, the same type of truck it makes in Indiana. Donald Trump's tariffs is leading GM to hire an unknown number of temporary workers to expand its production in the U.S.
Thank you very much. Sorry you had to sit through all that.
On the campaign trail, Mark Carney says Canada's countermeasures could deter automakers from moving south.
If a Silverado truck is made in the United States, it is going to face a 25% tariff on that truck coming into Canada. They're going to get weaker. We're going to get a deal in the end.
Statistics Canada says in March, more than 33,000 people lost their jobs. This week, the Stellantis plant in Windsor halted production. A possible GM pause has other companies worried about the ripple effects.
Most of our business here ships to Oshawa. So if Oshawa closed, then yeah, that would be a big worry for us.
During an election, Carney is limited by what he can do as prime minister, but all the party leaders are trying to secure the votes of trade workers because they're the ones being impacted the most in the initial stages of Donald Trump's trade war.
Our endorsement for Liberal leader Mark Carney. We felt that we needed a really experienced leader of this country who had the economic chops to be able to lead us through the 2008 recession and also the Brexit in the United States. Experience counts.
The Conservatives have been endorsed by the International Union of Boilermakers, while other large unions such as LIUNA and the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers support some of the party's policies but have not offered a full endorsement. Meanwhile, the New Democrats say they have the endorsement of unions that represent 1 million workers, including CUPE and the United Steelworkers. But whether the endorsements result in votes is left to be seen. Judy Trin, CTV News, Oakville.
The NDP putting the spotlight on two provinces on the East Coast where the party did not win any seats in the last election. It's an effort to bolster support in the region despite poor polling and resurrect an NDP legacy. CTV's Rachel Aiello is traveling with the NDP.
This weekend, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is campaigning in Atlantic Canada, targeting two specific cities where the NDP have held seats before in hopes of winning them back. Singh started his Saturday in St. John's, Newfoundland, making a sizable healthcare promise alongside his candidate for St. John's East. That riding has swung between Liberals and New Democrats since 2008. There, Singh made his case for why local voters should elect an NDP MP and leaned into his personal connection to the city.
I lived in St. John's from 2 years old to 7.
Singh then flew to Nova Scotia, where he rallied candidates, volunteers, and supporters outside a downtown Halifax campaign office.
Are we ready to make sure that people know they've got a voice in Halifax?
Yeah! The riding was an NDP stronghold for close to a decade, until the Liberals took it over in 2015. Singh's push to take back Halifax, once represented by former NDP leader Alexa McDonough, is getting some help from her family. McDonough's son Justin and granddaughter Abby are making calls for the NDP candidate that's hoping to follow in her footsteps.
It's kind of fun for me to be able to say, oh, that's actually my grandma.
I think there's a legitimate chance for the NDP to win here again, and I think Canadians would be better served if that happens across the country.
Past NDP MPs, current candidates, and voters that I've been speaking with today say Atlantic Canadians are really engaged in this election, specifically on affordability issues such as housing and healthcare. And so New Democrats in this region aren't ready to put much stock into the polls that suggest they could once again be shut out. Rachel Aiello, CTV News, Halifax.
The latest round of Donald Trump's tariffs taking effect today, with 10% on most global goods going into the U.S. And for the first time, we're getting a sense of how Mexicans are feeling about this economic upheaval. A CTV News Leger poll suggests their views are much more aligned with Canadians. Kamal Karmali now on how this could shape an even stronger relationship.
Winds of change are blowing in Mexico, a shift in thinking that's aligning more with Canadians.
We will reply. We will retaliate. We are a sovereign nation, and it resonates very well with the Mexican.
A CTV News Leger poll shows most Canadians and Mexicans surveyed have an unfavorable view of Donald Trump, with more than 80% of Canadians and 3/4 of Mexicans disliking the U.S. president, while a growing number in both countries are now viewing the United States as an enemy instead of an ally. More than 40% in Canada and 35% of Mexicans see the U.S. as a foe. That's a higher percentage than those who feel that way about Russia and China.
The views have changed, right? I mean, I have never seen in the recent polls America as an enemy.
For Canadians, the trade war against Trump is the most important issue, while for Mexicans, it's third behind crime and drug cartels. When it comes to how the country should respond to U.S. tariffs, 70% of Canadians and more than 60% of Mexicans would support a dollar-for-dollar response. Even then, more than half of Canadians polled and 3/4 of Mexicans support entering into a free trade agreement with the U.S., with the current one up for review next year.
So I would be urging the Canadian government to re-engage profoundly right now with the Mexican. We have a lot of things in common.
Experts now suggest using these common threads to also align their fight against fentanyl and support each other when it comes to increasing trade between Canada and Mexico. Heather.
All right, Kamal, thank you. Donald Trump's policies had thousands of Americans rallying across the U.S. today to condemn the president and his billionaire advisor, Elon Musk.
This is what democracy looks like.
Demonstrators marched in more than 1,000 locations, including Washington, New York, and Boston, to protest the administration's handling of the economy and the mass layoffs of government workers. Not only has the stock market plummeted since President Trump's global tariff announcements, but oil prices have also taken a nosedive. CTV's Kathy Lee has more on how the trade war uncertainty is impacting Canada's energy industry.
One of the largest drilling rig contractors in the country is just one of many energy companies facing uncertain times.
The short-term pain and unpredictability right now is just hard to stomach.
Sweeping global U.S. tariffs announced this week tanked the stock market. Oil prices also taking a hit. A nearly $10 drop over 2 days. West Texas Intermediate is now trading at $62 a barrel, a price not seen in years.
It wouldn't surprise me to see crude oil prices drop into the mid to high 50s.
For Calgary-based Precision Drilling, low oil prices are already impacting production. And if that doesn't rebound,
We'll end up having some rig workers that are without jobs for a few weeks or a few months.
The drastic drop in oil prices is a loss for Alberta as well. Its 2025 budget is based on a forecast of $68 US per barrel.
the province says every dollar lost means a hit of $750 million Canadian to its revenue.
Planning to rely on oil and gas revenues into the future is problematic not just because of this trade war today, but because global action on climate change continues, because electric vehicles continue, because renewable energy continues to grow.
Meanwhile, energy companies focusing on boosting production. Oil and gas CEOs expressing concern about the federal cap on emissions.
Energy exports are so important to the overall economy. We shouldn't be doing things to make those less competitive globally.
As for what may come in the climate of unpredictability,
the global situation right now is considering a recession. This is what could happen if the trade war carries on,
which can lead to oil prices dropping further. But there's still some optimism.
I do expect this will level out.
And that there will be a way to navigate through the challenges. Kathy Lee, CTV News, Calgary.
Coming up, small business breakdown.
There's ways to reduce energy costs, transportation costs.
The message to politicians as businesses bear the brunt of a trade war. Plus, what First Nations leaders want to see more of on the campaign trail. Food shortages, a trade war, and tariff concerns. Business owners are bracing for the worst, and they are hoping for solutions from political leaders on the campaign trail. CTV's Paul Hollingsworth looks at the issues at the top of their list.
Several years ago, this restaurant was closed during the COVID-19 lockdowns. Owner Lil McPherson says it almost wrecked her business.
Well, it was a huge bite.
McPherson is facing a new crisis, food shortages. She says Canada's next government will need to act fast to find a solution.
20% of the eggs are coming from the United States to be delivered here to hatcheries.
The avian flu outbreak in the U.S. has caused inventory issues north of the border.
We don't have enough eggs.
As trade tensions mount with the U.S., Canadians are being encouraged to buy local, but small business owners have a message for the party leaders in this campaign. In some cases, local is not available.
It should not be harder to sell to, Saskatchewan than it is to sell to Maine.
Halifax brewery owner Brian Titus hopes the next Prime Minister addresses the red tape causing trade barriers within Canada. Titus receives raw materials from Western Canada and he ships his products as far as Alberta.
There's ways to reduce energy costs, transportation costs, that kind of thing. That would be great.
Titus is also worried about tariff and counter-tariff protection on aluminum. He says this should be a top priority for leaders during the campaign to ease the burden on Canadian businesses and consumers.
It should make its way to the consumer because that is the only, and I'm talking about the U.S. consumer, because that is the only way they're going to actually care is if it affects their bottom line.
A bottom line, this business advocate says, helps churn economic growth.
The small businesses are what drives the local economies, what supports our towns and small cities.
We are the biggest employer. We are the tax collectors.
McPherson says, given the ongoing trade war with the U.S., the importance of small businesses to the overall Canadian economy has never been greater. Paul Hollingsworth, CTV News, Halifax.
Still ahead, a call to action. The reminder that the path to reconciliation is far from complete. The issue of residential schools raised today on the campaign trail. Liberal leader Mark Carney questioned about his father's role as the principal of a residential school and comments he made that supported that system. Here's what Carney had to say in response.
I love my father, but I don't share those views, to be absolutely clear. It's a long, painful part of our history.
Carney went on to say that the process of truth and reconciliation is at the core of his government. First Nations leaders are striving to ensure reconciliation and Indigenous issues don't fall off the radar during this campaign. CTV's Alex Carpin now with what some people living on First Nations want to see from the candidates.
There's my kids playing outside.
Samantha Ann Powderhorn is painfully familiar with the addiction and mental health crisis plaguing her home community of Taduli Lake in northern Manitoba.
It's so normalized and it's very sad to see.
Powderhorn is herself a recovering alcoholic. Having just returned from a visit, she says those living in isolated and remote communities don't have access to proper health supports.
What I really thought about was harm reduction would probably be the first step into taking action.
A sentiment shared by Linda Daniels, who has been living in Manitoba's Long Plain First Nation for over 70 years. Not only does she want to see better mental health and addiction supports, she also wants more focus on housing for First Nations communities.
Their houses are moldy. Their kids are sick. The houses are not, they're not done right. They're not built right.
The Assembly of First Nations is calling on all federal parties to uphold the rights of First Nations people and advance nation-to-nation relations. Indigenous leaders say the next federal government must also address economic reconciliation.
We shouldn't have to be, poor in our own land when we have such a wealth of natural resources. So addressing some of those fundamental long-term reform issues have to be front and center.
Powderhorn says reconciliation cannot just be talked about, but there needs to be action.
We cannot practice it until we actually forgive ourselves and forgive what happened in the past and learn from it and to go forward.
And for the Indigenous community, moving forward means calling on all party leaders to make First Nations priorities a central part of their platforms ahead of the election. Alex Karpa, CTV News, Winnipeg.
Still ahead, setting sail for romance. We'll tell you about a love affair that conquered the 7 seas. It's a tale reminiscent of a Nicholas Sparks movie, a BC couple that didn't let a naval deployment sink their love story. In fact, as CTV's Adam Sawatsky shows you, their separation set the stage for the surprise of a lifetime.
This is the story of how a ship departed with something meaningful on board, but arrived months later with that item unexpectedly on shore. A story that begins, Shaylin Ross says, after meeting Scott Colson in high school.
I asked if he wanted to go with me to prom, and he said no. I know. It felt like rejection. It stung, and I have not let him forget it ever since.
Shaylin's joking. Everything was fine. They were just friends. It wasn't until years later that they unexpectedly reconnected and became best friends.
And we would just stay up all night talking, like endlessly, and laughing and giggling.
And so every day was just such a good day.
You could just be vulnerable right off the bat.
Better and better every day.
Every day for more than a year, until that one day.
And I remember looking at him and it just like hitting me in the gut, like, oh my God, I love this man.
So they embarked on a romantic relationship until Scott, who serves in the Navy, was deployed on a mission to the other side of the Pacific for 6 months.
Leaving for any amount of time is no fun, especially when you're in love.
So, before they said goodbye, Scott started making a secret plan, which included asking her parents' permission, buying a ring he kept safe in this locker on the ship, and flying Shaylin to Japan for his Christmas break, where he arranged a surprise proposal.
The full body electric jolt that I got, seeing him down on one knee, indescribable.
I had this whole thing planned out that I was going to say. Everything was lost when I went down on my knee, and I just said, "Will you marry me?"
Yes, 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 a million times yes.
Which was followed days later by a billion goodbyes when she had to return to Canada and he had to continue his mission for another 3 months.
It was a tough goodbye, for sure, her leaving.
But that only made him arriving back after half a year more wonderful.
Finally hold my fiance. It felt just incredible.
And that's how a ship that departed with something special on board arrived home with it being worn by someone special on shore. Adam Sawatsky, CTV News, Esquimalt.
It's a beautiful love story. That is our newscast for this Saturday night. I'm Heather Butts. For all of us at CTV National News, thank you for watching. Good night, and I'll see you again tomorrow.